welcome to episode 100, ladies and gentlemen, of Lighting the Candle, a World That Works. That just rolls off the tongue. It's been a year and a half of just lovely messages to the world and lots of really good things going on. I'm Bill Correll, and I'm here with three of my favorite people. I've got to my right, your left, Jan Jeremias, and then above her is our friend Ken Caputo, and to his left, my right, is Lisa Sheehan. And we've been doing this. Holy mackerel! It doesn't seem like that long, but I guess it does add up after a little while. So I have an announcement to make, and it's a big week here at the Exvadio Podcast Network as we celebrate Lighting the Candle's 100th episode. Also, this week, our sister podcast, Success Showcase, celebrates its 200th episode. So we're celebrating with a giveaway of signed books from Exvadio podcasters and guests, including Spoil Your Pet from our own Jan Jeremias, who will be hosting her podcast, Pet Life and Longevity with Jan and Tonka, as well as The Biznetics Way by Eric Lopkin and more. So how do you get in on this? You just go to xvadio.com/contest to enter. One winner will be chosen at random. And thank you so much for that, Eric Lopkin. So here we are. And we typically start off with a pretty mundane word, and then we try to add some volume and some flesh to it, with our different stories and different takes. And when you get to episode 100, they tell me that something, very miraculous happens. That episode 100 actually means you're a real podcast. I'm not sure if I'm ready for that, but apparently, in some views, 100 episode is a really good one. So I'd like to just begin by inviting my three cohorts here to maybe share a little bit for a few minutes what the last year and a half has been like, constructing 100 episodes of Lighting the Candle, a World That Works. And Mr. Ken and Miss Lisa, you probably are, tied for who's been on the most numbers of broadcasts other than myself. But why don't we do it this way? Ladies before gentlemen, and Lisa, what's it been like for you to be on this podcast for a year and a half?
I think it's like life. It ebbs and flows, goes up and down. I think like anything that you have a structure for, some days you just can't wait to get there, and other days you don't know how you're going to fit it in. But I also know that constantly learning and taking classes and trying to improve body, mind, soul, and planet. So I wanted to become better at speaking. Apparently, it's not working well right now. But that I wanted to experience that more. And of course, a podcast is a brilliant way to do that. So I like feeling more comfortable. I think at the beginning, your mind starts invading and saying, "Did I say the right thing? Why did I say that? What will they think of me?" But I like it better now. I mean, it's so free flowing that we've done that. There's no script, obviously, and so we kind of speak from our hearts and from experience. So I enjoy that aspect of it too. So I like being able to grow in a platform or be involved in something that helps me grow as well as sharing things that I've learned with all of you and everyone listening.
Excellent. Mr. Ken.
I was actually reflecting on this a little bit, and I think, I mean, we talk about candles, lighting candles, and a big part of that is you have to cultivate the light in your own candle, or you can't light anything else, you know. And this conversation that we've been having, this kind of meandering conversation, has been really a testament to the value of meaningful conversation and actually, having an agreement that you're going to question, you're going to explore, you're going to say I don't know. And and what I find is the dialogue, just the act of having conversation like this, when I go out and start interacting with people who are maybe in some, kind of closed habituated patterns, it reminds me to stay open and stay curious and just allow the light that we kind of tend to in this hour to then expand however it may, simply by modeling it in the other interactions that I have, you know, throughout my day. So it's really been pretty cool, especially when things get noisy. And I'm sure for all the listeners, there's times where you get caught up in emotion and outrage and opinions and all of that. And this is a place where, first and foremost, we've just committed to the dialogue, and see allowing that to lead us wherever it leads us.
Mhm.
So it's been pretty powerful.
That's great. Miss Jan, how about you?
Being the newest person to the clan, um, it for me it reminds me of when I teach yoga and I'm in a class and I start in one space and I end in another. So I start class and I'm in one place, and some of that comes from when I speak as a teacher or when I share with you all here. Sometimes I think we all aren't necessarily clear sometimes what we want to say or where we're going, and then all of a sudden it becomes crystal clear. And that happens in the dialogue and the conversation. That happens by hearing other people and listening and truly listening. So I think for me, it's just this, I love when I first get on, and then as I leave, and the fact that of what I think about afterwards, like the residual effects of how it remains, and what I ponder going forward, and what I share with other people.
Mm, that's great. I'm reminded of, well, actually, I'm just going to coin a phrase here: conversational alchemy. You and I are creating gold. Uh, we're doing it in the sharing of thoughts with each other, and we're also doing it in the spontaneity of having no particular direction that we want or need to go, other than to invite people to get lost in a conversation for roughly an hour a week, and at the end of which, feel pretty good about it. That there's things that we could talk about that would actually consume time and energy and air, and they would make no difference to the world. And it's kind of an audacious statement when we first started this, that we could actually generate a conversation that would touch other people and allow them to bring some light into their lives as well. And not the light that we're giving them, the light that's being ignited and choose to be ignited by the people that are being ignited, and then going and delivering that to their families, friends, clients, vendors, whatever. And at the end of the day, if a few people get more enjoyment out of the next trip around the sun, not a bad way to spend our time, I don't think. So I don't want to be, um, too significant about what we've done, because we've actually creatively wasted a lot of time in the last year and a half, which it's been a ball. And from a standpoint of productivity and what matters to people, it's kind of an interesting thing to me to think that because of the durability of where these podcast platforms are, I can go and look for podcasts that I listened to as long ago as 15, 16 years. They're still there. That's kind of a neat thing to think about, that at some point in the future, some child or some young adult or some person a lot older than me uh, will listen to something that we've said in this period of pretty much chaos with regard to COVID and all the things going on in the world. And maybe, just maybe, their day will be just a little bit brighter, maybe have a little bit more spring in their step. And, I kind of like to think of it in terms of that I don't know where this is going to go or who's going to hear it and who's going to respond to it. And I really do love being in a conversation with smart people, you know? And here we are.
Can we throw that question back at you?
Sure.
So how's the past year and a half doing this podcast
Well,
affected you?
it's been a very interesting prospect. It's been wonderful, actually. I've gotten to hear great stories from all of you fine folks. Plus, there's probably been another just under a dozen people that have either were on in the early days and are no longer on, or were guests or what have you. And it's been fun for one thing. And the other thing that I have to say is, you all have been marvelous about allowing me to be in all 100 episodes, and that's kind of like the tie that binds. And by convening these meetings and being the person, uh, you know, I just really do have a great appreciation for all of you as people. And I'm talking to the people that are listening as well. I have another podcast that I'm doing, which is called the 100 Person Project, which all three of these beautiful folks have been interviewed by me. And that's going extremely well. And I have to tell you, I'm interested in doing yet another podcast. And the whole idea is that if I come away from a half hour or an hour with other people, and I'm feeling like I actually can be productive in where I'm going and what I'm doing, then what's it doing for those people as well? And I have to tell you that each one of you, after we were finished doing that one-on-one, there was something that showed up in your face, like a lot brighter. Like you actually all were beaming. I don't know if you can remember that experience, but we're up to, I think I've recorded 8 or 9 interviews so far, and I'm really, really enjoying the whole notion of, it doesn't matter what we're talking about, as long as two people are genuinely and authentically or more sharing with each other. That's what I get out of it. I think that that interaction between us is extremely important. And that said, getting this 100th podcast to a recording has not been an easy task. For those of you at home, you may notice that the last almost month, there's been something going on with some kind of disruption or illness or COVID. I actually did have COVID 3 weeks ago. I'm mostly better now. And with that all said, I don't really have a lot more to add. And thank you for asking me directly, Lisa, because um, I do gush, and I do have a very emotional connection with all three of you, and I actually love you a whole lot, all three of you. And that said, the word for this week, I would like us to spend a little bit of time knocking around respect and appreciation. Don't edit that pause, Eric.
Outward facing, inward facing, or both?
All of the above.
Well, I guess I would be curious, the relationship that people have with the inward facing. You know, what do you respect about yourself? What do you appreciate in yourself? I mean, if we're talking about, you know, lighting your own candle, you know, when you look inward, and that's an interesting thing, especially working with teens a lot for almost 4 decades now. That can be something that can be very challenging, and a lot of noise can disrupt the clarity with which they can find that respect for themselves and that appreciation for themselves. So how do you nurture and cultivate that?
It's kind of the beginning of everything, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it also it's not a static thing. It's contextual and situational, so it ebbs and it flows, just like everything in life. So sometimes you're feeling a little less of it for yourself, and then other times it expands. So how do you ride that wave and be okay with that? So it's not like you should have it or you don't deserve it. It's To me it feels like a spectrum, and it it's kind of tidal.
I was thinking too, well, lately, I think might have mentioned this once before, but like appreciation and gratitude kind of seem to go together. Um, and to basically create situations that people can appreciate, that you generate. And so the premise was, or the idea was to not not look for things that you're grateful for, but give gratitude, or give something to people that they can appreciate, so that you can experience the appreciation, which is actually much more powerful than just imagining something that you're grateful for. And
Hmm.
I realized too that people, I think, often do it often and are not aware of it. For example, like if you kick a nail out of the road or the sidewalk so that somebody else will not be harmed by it. There's things like that that I think we do in everyday life, and if you can shine your light on that, just being aware of that too, like little things that you do probably every day, and not out of selfish need to be approved, or but just out of your genuine concern and love for other people, so that they can experience appreciation for something else that somebody did, if that makes any
Hmm.
sense.
It really does. I'm interested in what Jan has to say, though, before I respond to that, because I think both you and Ken have made some really good points.
And going off of what? Well, first of all, I I love the idea self of self appreciation and self respect. Just because if you don't have it for yourself, you're not going to have it for anyone else. So, and Ken talked about kids, and I much more work with older adults. And I just got off a meeting with someone, and we were talking about that. And we were talking about like the whole idea of respecting elders and older people and the wisdom or the knowledge they bring, and the appreciation of that whole generation of individuals that have offered and given themselves so much of themselves so much, and then tend to be pushed aside, and especially in a lot of in our society. So we were focused on that. So Ken was talking about younger people, and I was thinking about older people, and how doesn't matter, but really it's about self-respect and appreciation of everyone.
It's a pretty interesting concept, and what I hear that's the same in both is that the old ageless spirit, timeless body type of approach. You're always speaking, to the inner God of every human being. And how would a God speak to a God? What kind of a relationship would you have to have? Because when you think about what we're doing, we are creating worlds with language, and from that standpoint, the world that we create has to come from um, some responsibility for that. And I think we've all probably learned in our lives that words matter, and not only do words matter, um, and sometimes you have to teach language in mid-sentence to both yourself and to the other persons that are cooperating in the conversation. which is why I refer to it as conversational alchemy. The notion that at some point there will be gold in every conversation kind of gives me, the energy and well, if I need to have a reason to be in conversation or speaking with somebody, it's going to be to create something really, really nice. And if that happens, and it's not always a given that it will happen, but it's got a better chance. I think what you're referring to, if you call forth the wisdom, in older people, and you are intending and expecting for that wisdom to show up, you're creating an invitation for a particular kind of conversation, and then that person will deliver in kind. And I've seen it, in my life with in the old days when I was a small child, the oldest people in our lives were 40s. We didn't have anybody that lived past the age of 55 or 60. So grandparents were gone, aunts and uncles. And so the people in their 40s almost never consider themselves as being very wise. They're just beginning to understand what the questions are. And I think that that's where, older people that have been around the block a little bit are a lot more interested in becoming better question askers. So with regard to generating an internal relationship with respect and appreciation as a place to come from, as a font, for the thinking and for the conversation. I wonder how many people actually do mental exercises to prepare themselves to be in a meaningful conversation with somebody that will be in, a space of respect and appreciation.
I love what Jan said about the multi-generational. It's actually been top of mind lately for me too.
Yeah.
And how, how we got there with Ken bringing up the youth and Jan bringing up the elders, or at least adults. And I've talked about loving the idea of being an elder. It doesn't come just from getting old. So, but I've also been involved lately with it's called T at 3. So they match you with somebody that's 15 years different from you in age. So she's a little more than 15 years, but she's a college senior. So it's been interesting getting to know her, and she's first generation from Ghana. So there's all sorts of fun things to talk about. But our common our common interest was the ukulele. So the woman that organized it said she'd never had two people that played the ukulele, so it was kind of an easy match. But in the same respect, I lost my uncle a couple weeks ago, and it was the first one in that generation. So we've been very fortunate to have so many people in their 80s, still with us. And at his funeral, I got to re-meet my 96-year-old cousin. So we want to get together, and she's really good with sending cards to everybody. She's just a fantastic lady, and we haven't had that many conversations, so now we're going to get together with her to at least try to get some information from her, because she's still, quick-witted and got a sharp mind. So I I'm so interested in the multi-generational thing, and even maybe how do people live together generationally like they used to in some cultures, or still do in some cultures. So, and that's completely involving respect and appreciation, like both all of you were saying. You have to see that value in other people, regardless of where they are age wise.
And that was the word that I was just thinking of when you just came out of your mouth, Lisa, which was value. Is how do you value everyone, no matter the age?
I think it can also be important to remember to apply some discernment to how that value relates, or how you relate to that value. Um, I'll give you a very, very brief personal story. It's the tale of two grandfathers. My mother's father, when he passed, his and it, through no fault of his own, just the environment of his life, he kind of was very closed off and abusive, and just didn't really he didn't acquire any real wisdom. He just kind of lived and died, and mostly alone, and not very well liked. And it was a very vivid experience. I didn't have much of a connection with him. My father's father immigrated from Sicily in the 30s, came into an arranged marriage, was married until he passed, for 65 years later. And at his funeral, there were over 100 people there. And he had founded an orchestra called the Mandolin Band, and he would go to play at retirement communities. He would say for the old people that were often 20 years younger than him. He had sponsored all of these people into the country. He taught me more about me being a man when I was young than, you know, anyone anyone in my life, including his son, my dad, you know. And it was so interesting having conversations with them at the same age would be very, very different experiences as the value that they could bring to me. So I had to look beyond just the fact that they'd lived a long time and instead learn to recognize the experiences that they had acquired and how relevant that was. So, and I think, just through the years, you see this in the martial arts too, just because someone has a lot of stripes on their belt and they've learned martial arts skill sets doesn't mean that they're masters in all elements of life. So, how you extend value to the things they have to say, there needs to be some discernment, you know, put into that, not just blind acceptance. So, older doesn't necessarily mean wiser, I guess is my point.
And yet there is hopefully some sort of wisdom that comes with age, and I,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and I think about that. I use martial arts. I think about that when I refer to my students and I tell them that, to me, an advanced yoga person or yoga practitioner has nothing to do with how complicated the poses you can do is like,
Right.
if you make a pretzel with your body and you can hold it for 5 seconds, to me that doesn't make, you know, you know, seasoned, and that comes from wisdom. The fact that you realize that you doing those poses is really insignificant. It's really not that important. In the grand
Right.
scheme, of getting in touch with yourself. In your description of your grandparents, when my grandmother was probably was probably the most influential person in my life, and maybe that's why I've always been very focused on older adults because of my relationship with her. But she lived on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and I would call her, and she was 85 or 90, and she'd be like, "I can't talk to you now. I'm going to class at the Y." And she lived around the corner from the 92nd Street Y. So, and it was like cracked me up, like that there she was. Didn't matter that she was in her late 80s, like she was going to go out and socialize and go to current events and whatnot.
She wasn't planning on sliding out the back door. She
No,
was going to run out the back door.
exactly.
It's kind of an interesting concept. Like I said, I came from a very large family on one side. My mom had 7 sisters and 1 brother. And so when I go to Colorado, there's an opportunity to gather over 100 people at a time, all relatives. On my dad's side of the family, he had 2 sisters, really didn't have any cousins, and those families just grew apart over the years. Um, 2 kids, each of the sisters, and then of course my mom and dad had 6 kids. And again, we really didn't get an opportunity to be around older people, so we would adopt neighbors, Nana and Max, who these were the old people in our family, right? They were both retirees. They lived next door to us when I was, getting out of grammar school. And in those days, there was a lot of family gatherings, um, a lot of jovial conversation, a lot of smoking cigarettes and drinking beer, too much all the way around. I mean, to the point where you walk through the kitchen and all the adults had cigarettes going, and you actually couldn't see all the children because the fog was so dense, right? And then I can just remember, having conversations with both of my parents, and as the night wore on, and they told me secrets about their childhood and things that they would never tell me if they hadn't been, drinking beer for 2 or 3 hours. And so the wisdom that I took away in those days was far different than the wisdom that I got out of meeting my wife's parents. Now, these were all teetotalers. They lived into their 90s routinely. The home that we live in, Jan's grandfather bought in 1890, and he passed away here at the age of 96 years old, carrying the ash can out to the road. And he just keeled over, and the neighborhood boys, found him and, you know, uh, got somebody to come and take care of, getting him inside so the family could deal with it. So that was in the 50s. But Jan's dad, when I met him in 1974, he was 74 years old, and he passed in 1983. But every time we got together, we would have one shot of Harvey's Bristol cream, and that was it. That was like a big deal for him to get this bottle out. I think it took us years to consume one whole bottle. But this was a man who he went to Middlebury and then he went to Yale Law School, and he'd been around, was in college when Woodrow Wilson was president, and so he had stories about every single president from the teens. Now we're into the 70s when I was meeting him, and he was not a guy who was appreciated or respected. This was a guy that had accomplished many, many things and had done so many things for children and boys. He was a Boy Scout leader, and he just never. I mean, when you're around somebody and you can tell that they've never been truly appreciated. What I got from him was, do not live into your 80s so that you can be a miserable old man. Find out how to love people and be loved so you can go to the why when you're 90 years old and not sit at home being frustrated looking at magazines, crisscrossing, through Time magazine stories that he didn't like. It was really very, very interesting. So the other thing that we did is we had my mother-in-law, who lived with us for almost 13 years after Jan's dad passed away. And her name was Mimi. And Mimi didn't graduate from high school. And she had a whole lifetime of experience that she could impart in a sentence or two. She was probably the old person in my life that I looked at and I got the most sage advice, the most true love from somebody who we both considered the other person to be kind of an antagonist. And we both let each other know that we missed each other terribly if we were apart for any period of time. And then we'd get right back at it again. It's kind of a funny thing. I don't know if you've ever lived with an in-law. Are you familiar with the terminology "no place to hide"? There's no secrets, no substitutions, and no timeouts. And thank God it was her, because as difficult as it could have been at particular times, looking back on it, I miss those days. I just completely miss when Mimi was around, and she'd walk into a room And she'd come forward, and it was always the sentence that preceded, Bill. There was almost always going to be work for old Bill after the Bill came out. She was just wonderful. Respect and appreciation. I don't think I thought about that much in those days. I don't think my attention was on generating a conversation, inside of a space of respect and appreciation. Why would I have thought of that? I mean, there was nobody I knew that was using those kinds of concept, right? You're in a conversation to win, right? Isn't that what conversations are for? Who makes the best point? Who gets the last word? Who leaves the other person feeling broken? And I think those were the kind of conversations that we were having in the 80s and 90s that I recall. Till I went and took a course at the Y, which was very helpful.
And I'm thinking about, as you said that, I'm thinking about, being younger, and who did you really, who at that time, who was I focused on respecting? Teachers. Like that was a very big thing. You respected your teacher. Like you would never talk back to a teacher, or, and it was just not even that you were afraid of getting in trouble. It was just like there was something about, teachers and what they did, and there was a respect for teachers, and probably certain people that I don't even want to bring up in conversation.
What's funny about that is this, I remember a guy. I was relatively new in the military at the time, and he said, you'll always show respect for the rank, and sometimes you get lucky and you can also show respect for the person holding the rank. And so you respect the role, you salute, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have that respect for the human that's occupying that position. That's something that was kind of earned behind it. And, and it was a very interesting thing. And I think about that with teachers. I'm sure we all had different relationships with the level of respect we had for certain teachers. Like we all had those teachers that really were very powerful in helping us discover who we were, or developing a passion for a certain subject or something. And then others that just kind of, they did a job, and back then, you're right, we were respectful of the teacher for being a teacher. It's, it can be a little bit different now, but it is kind of interesting. That's like a nuance to respect. When you think about it, there's the role, and then there's the person.
I love that differentiation, and that, just the idea that, you can respect for a role, or not necessarily, the person may not necessarily be what you might focus on as being, um, but the person may not be respected as the individual.
Yeah, and even like, when we do organizational events, like I don't like the term master. I prefer to just be Ken. But then when we go into these formal events, there's a title. I have to be Master Caputo, and I don't push against that. That's me demonstrating respect for the rules that have been put in place by the person hosting the event. So, and it doesn't matter whether I agree with it. It's if I'm going to participate, and they've been clear in the way that they would like, to practice certain things, then, I play by those rules, and that's okay. So, and I think sometimes that can lead to some confusion too. It's, well, I don't agree with that. So therefore, I'm going to do it my way. It's like, well, but you're in someone else's home. So if they don't want you to put your feet on the coffee table, it's their home. It doesn't matter what you do in your home. So yeah, so it was just, there's some interesting lessons like that. That again, Bill, you talk about context. Like I think for some people, appreciation is something that they get early on. Like I had a deep appreciation for my grandfather, because he was my adopted grandfather. So he didn't, he accepted me into a Sicilian family as blood, and that was an incredibly powerful thing that he did not need to do, because I wasn't blood, but he treated me like that. So I had an appreciation for being fortunate enough to have family that you wouldn't if you just had your family. And that was just like an accepted thing, so I had a very unique context that allowed for appreciation to kind of come to the forefront where, a lot of my friends growing up didn't. They just had grandparents. They had a dad, or a mom or whatever it was. So it's interesting how all those things are so contextual in nature.
Yeah, there's another element to it. If I look back at the first, well, through the 1950s and 60s, there were an awful lot of cultural, family-based um, mores, and a lot of family. Like for instance, I had very very good Irish friends, and the thing that really was remarkable about my buddy John's mother was whenever she spoke about the men in the family, it was almost like she was describing Hercules or Superman. As far as she was concerned, these were the most important and the most impactful figures in her life. And she just, everything she said was so respectful of who they were, especially the ones that had passed. And so that stuck, really stuck out to me as a memorable cultural thing that I hadn't seen in other families. So like my family, we didn't even know where we came from. My grandfather was very tight-lipped about where his people were from, but we knew we were Germans, and we liked beer, and that was good. Uh, but at the same time, I never heard anybody speaking respectfully about other people in the family, if you will. There was no, cultural upbringing that you will behave in a certain way other than what my parents told us. And then we didn't necessarily observe them following their own rules, if you know what I mean. So it was more or less that our generation got talked to as opposed to being led by demonstration. And the other folks that I was around that impressed me, like how their families worked. I don't know, maybe they were modeling a behavior because I was there and it was out of the ordinary. I'll never know. But it left me feeling that there are some families and some cultures that are no longer getting that passed from generation to generation. And we have far more broken homes these days. There's a lot more, kids that are raised with an absent parent, or, you know, they're not even sure where or who their parents are in a lot of instances. It's a different time for people to be learning. And if they're not getting it in school, where are they going to be getting this kind of a conversation from? You and I were fortunate to have older people in our family that could model something for us that we felt was valuable, that we could carry on. And where do people who don't know that they don't know this, where do they get it?
I think when you talk about schools too, like teachers, and I don't know if that level of respect is still there that we had as children in high school, and our all of our lives. And I do recall like being in high school, and I had such an appreciation for learning from, especially from good teachers. I
Yeah.
liked the hard teachers. I liked the ones that other people thought were mean. I wanted to learn. I really did. And I'll never forget one time. And this I can't even remember what subject he taught. It was some science, but and he was a well liked teacher, and he was tough. But I always got good grades. But he, after a project one day, he just came up to me and said how he appreciated my involvement in the class. So it was a great twist. and I never forgot it. It's like how interesting, like an adult told a child how much he appreciated, their attention in his class.
Yeah. Yeah, there have been other things that have occurred over the years as well. The reality of the situation is, with the issues with the Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts of America, and then some other things where kids were taken advantage of because they did give un questioned respect to people that didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, that has a kind of a play on the situation as well. So I guess the main thing here, in terms of wanting this conversation that we're in to generate empowerment for human beings that are looking for that, I would just invite everyone to start having different conversations with people and really, inquire into what are the things that allow human beings to build trust. And, when you think about how do you and I approach each other and create a sentence before the sentence? When when Mimi would walk through the door and she would say, Bill, um, I had so much fun telling people these stories afterwards. And, one of them was, ended up with a new roof. Another one was, something that she thought needed to be done in terms of some old books and letters that she had that from my father-in-law's law practice. And sometimes it was just a prelude to a story, about when she was a teenager, going out with this guy named Johnny, and in his Willis Knight, and that thing could go like 60, you know, and she was a popular girl, and she wound up, taking care of her mom after her father was killed in a car accident for 30 years, and then she married my father-in-law, and they were 25 years difference in age. So it was really kind of an incredible thing to be around all of those dynamics. And at the same time, I wasn't present to respect and appreciation all the time. However, I'm at that point in my life right now where I want to invite people to that party.
So, Bill, when you were talking about that, my first reaction is how do we come to a conversation and have it, you know, begin with respect or plant like just put that in the conversation before we get there. And I think one of the first steps is to actually realize that everybody, when you first meet them, everybody deserves respect. It's almost starting and giving everybody an A or an A plus if you wanted to grade, versus having everybody start from the bottom and then having to earn, is what would happen if we were to look at everybody at the highest level versus, having everybody be in a position, well, they have to prove that, that they're that they're deserving, that that they deserve respect almost.
I love that. It's like you're building this huge safety net for people to play their best cards and to trust the situation, as opposed to not trusting the situation and not really participating. If you're already 100% accepted, you got no place. You can't fail. But if you're in a situation where you're not starting out, with that respect and appreciation, there's a lot of risk in opening your mouth and participating in the conversation at all, isn't there?
Hmm. Yeah, because if you go into a conversation and you feel like you always have to prove yourself or you always have to be right, which nobody can always be right, then obviously that whole idea of self-respect and self-appreciation begins to waver, because that's a goal. That's like a level which you can never obtain. And then, where if you start from the highest level, then, it gives you everybody who's working from the same place.
Yeah.
This might be a little simplistic, but I've been I think I love what Jan just said too, but the also I've been taken aback just by an honest "How are you?" Not just like "Hey, how are you?" But and like I've come and I've brought people to tears when because I when I ask it, I genuinely I I am I am in appreciation of how they really feel. I want to know. I'm curious. You know, So I think that it's a simple way to start a conversation, like how no, how are you? you know, Not just good. No, how are you? People get lost, and then after they get over the honesty and the thrill almost of somebody wanting to hear how they are. It's an interesting conversation that follows.
That's a powerful thing because you're basically what you're doing is you're demonstrating that you're present. You're
Mhm.
like fully there in that moment, and that's a hard thing right now.
You're
There's
right.
so many distractions, and we're so used to everyone around us not being fully present, and we're challenged with being fully present for ourselves. So yeah, so that's kind of a cool, almost like a lifeline. It's like, wow, there's someone that's actually seeing me and actually listening to me right now. And it just like probably almost shocks them into being present in a way that just, I mean, how often are you in the middle of talking to someone and all of a sudden you realize they're like just not there? you know, and you're like, never mind, I'll just stop.
Uh,
So, yeah.
Yeah, Ken, based on that, I was going to go back to what you originally said, and that's self respect and self appreciation. And so, how often do we actually ask ourselves, like, how am I? Like, how
Mm.
do I feel? Whenever, I remember having a conversation with someone, and she said the word she hates is when people just say fine. Because she said most of the time they're not fine. It's like, how are you? Fine. Well, it's kind of like to me, it's like, as I sit down, whatever, when I meditate or whatever, it's like really like, okay, well, how am I? And I think that, you know, that's, going to both what you said in the beginning, what Lisa just said, as opposed to being with other people and asking how they are. And your whole beginning part about self appreciation and self respect.
Mm.
It's funny that you could flip that, and I'm sure Bill, you will remember this. My mentor John, if you asked him how he was doing, he would stop and he's like, "Oh, oh, crazy good." And it was like he didn't he never mailed it in. Like he let you know, all right, you asked the question, here it comes. And that was kind of cool too, because there's that same thing. It was the reverse, because you asked it, usually it's obligatory, but then he would pull you into,
Mhm.
that present moment by creating this almost build up to his response. And it was just, I'm sure Bill, you remember, I'm sure anytime you met, you saw him, that was just who he was. So it's kind of cool. It works in both directions, you know?
Yeah, he was a really great mirror. He loved, giving back what he was receiving.
Hmm.
And just a human being full of love, very quick with a hug. Absolutely the kind of person that when you look, eye to eye, face to face, whatever he's seeing in your face, he's giving you right back 150%. And it was really just a wonderful experience.
And the other thing, Jan, you're talking about that highest level,
Yeah.
he modeled that as well. So it didn't matter what you did wrong if you came to him with it. If you said, I screwed this up, whatever, there was never this sense of judgment or recrimination. It's like, okay, that's interesting. What do we learn from this? Or what do we do with this? Or, oh, wow. It was just like, and I don't know. I think that as humans, if we could feel safe in always staying curious, what would that be like? You know, and that's what he did. It was like he was just curious about what that would lead to, and there wasn't this sense of, oh, you're a bad person for having done that, or I respect you less now for having made that decision. And he would say to me, yeah, that was probably a dumb thing to do, but we would laugh. Like it wasn't hurtful or harmful. It was just, like we've said it probably in one of the earlier podcast episodes, like early on, we're all human and sometimes we suck at it. And he would bring that sense of, so that's something, I guess, talk about lighting candles. It lit a lot of candles.
Going back to Lisa's comment, the authenticity in the words, the authenticity is so much more important than the words. And it's like I got into a kick while I was sick with COVID, watching a bunch of old science fiction movies, including um, Brave New World and 1984. And in a Brave New World, the alphas always talk to the underlings when they would say the following: "Hello, how are you? I am fine too. Thanks for asking." That was the salutation. "Hello, how are you? I am fine. Thanks for asking." What? Don't need to have the underling say anything. It's all handled. And so they really were not interested in how the other person was doing at all. So when you presence the "how are you," you can always tell if somebody's really interested if they don't say anything after they ask that question.
It made me realize too that there are some people that I should be asking that to as well.
Yeah.
New people, it's kind of easier, but like people you see all the time, it's a good opportunity, or to remind myself and everyone else that there's people that are closest to you that you should ask that question to, which I'm going to do as well.
Well, I was in a landmark course called Partnership, and for one whole weekend, instead of asking people, "how are you?" you'd ask them, "how am I?" And then they would tell you how you are.
That's fun.
Mm.
And it was just kind of a neat little exercise in getting out of your own head and really having to pay attention to the human being that's in front of you. Anyhow, it's amazing to me. um, I feel lighter than I did an hour ago.
Yeah.
um, I'm just intensely happy to spend this time with you folks after such a long road to get here and get us all four in the same place at one time. That's quite a little thing we did there. So, any other thoughts to kind of wrap up on, episode 100? Any final things that you may have thought about the 100 episodes, and just anything you'd like to say at all?
And I think it's kind of cool to end with or to be here with the word appreciation, because I think that kind of expresses how we all feel when we do it, how even better we feel after it's over. Like I appreciate Jen bringing that into the conversation, that how different she's a different person, and when she starts and when she finishes, and which is a testament for something that's good. Lighting the candle has to be a good thing, right? At least if we take it that way, and find a way to use it to do that with somebody else. So light somebody else's candle today. It doesn't matter how you do it, but simply just say, "How are you?"
My mentor would say, won't it be interesting to see how it shows up today?
Mm.
You know, and he just remind you, just stay curious and just be open. There's some level of appreciation or love or, you know, gratitude, whatever it's going to be. It's there. Just are you going to notice it when it comes? You know, and won't it be interesting to see what it looks like? And today it'll be one thing, and tomorrow it'll probably be something different.
Any final thoughts, Jan?
Well, when Lisa was saying, "How are you?" I thought about a comment Ken had made, or when we were chatting a few weeks ago, probably a month or so ago, was about love. And that was my first reaction when you said that, with that authenticity, was that being an expression of love. So, that was what I was thinking about. And just, if we all start, and we're in a different place and we end in a different place and we're moving forward, then we always, I think it's almost impossible not to go out, as people listen and have an impact on someone else.
Yes, you do want to have an impactful life.
Mm-hmm.
Be impacted and impact. Full contact living. I definitely. Anyway, I love and respect and appreciate all of you. And I want to thank you at home for tuning in one more time. We start our next 100 next week. So in the meantime, I'm Bill Correll with Ken Caputo, Lisa Sheehan, Jan Jeremias, and we thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye for now.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.